November the 23rd, 1996. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 departed from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, en route to Nairobi, Kenya. It was a routine flight carrying 175 people, including 12 crew members across East Africa. For the passengers, it was an ordinary day, but just 20 minutes after takeoff, chaos erupted. Without warning, a man leapt from his seat and sprinted down the aisle toward the cockpit. Two others quickly followed, shouting at passengers to stay seated and warning that they had a bomb. Fear rippled through the cabin as the hijackers stormed the cockpit, forcing the door open and confronting the pilots. They claimed there were 11 hijackers on board and demanded an immediate course change. Their destination? Australia. Captain Leul Abate, a seasoned pilot with over 11,000 flight hours, remained calm under pressure. Incredibly, this wasn't his first encounter with hijackers. It was his third. But as the hijackers screamed their demands, Captain Abate knew this situation would be different. Flying a Boeing 767 from Africa to Australia without refueling was impossible. The plane simply didn't have the fuel. Abate tried reasoning with the hijackers, showing them the fuel gauges and explaining the aircraft's limits. But they wouldn't listen. Misled by an in-flight magazine that exaggerated the plane's capabilities, they accused Abate of lying. When their demands weren't met, they turned violent. The first officer was beaten and forced out of the cockpit. One hijacker, holding a whiskey bottle, slumped into the first officer's seat, tampering recklessly with the controls. Captain Abate realized he was dealing with irrational captors. Their demands defied logic, and their actions put everyone on board in jeopardy. In that moment, Abate's years of experience told him one thing. This flight was no longer about reaching a destination, it was about survival. Inside the cockpit, the situation was growing more chaotic by the minute. The hijackers' demand to fly the Boeing 767 to Australia was not only impossible, but reckless. Captain Abate tried to explain the reality. The plane didn't have enough fuel for such a journey. He pointed to the fuel gauges as proof, showing them that the aircraft was only prepared for the short trip to Kenya, but the hijackers refused to believe him. One of them, having read an article in the in-flight magazine, insisted that the Boeing 767 could fly for 11 hours without refueling. It didn't matter how many times Abate explained, or how many facts he presented. Logic wasn't part of their plan. Their disbelief turned into hostility. They accused Abate of lying to force an emergency landing, and threatened him with violence if he didn't comply. The hijackers were irrational and unpredictable. Two of them left the cockpit to address the passengers, taking control of the cabin. They forced flight attendants to make an announcement in 3 languages, declaring that the plane had been hijacked, the destination was changing, and anyone who resisted would face consequences. Fear swept through the cabin as passengers sat silently, heads down, trying to process what was happening. Back in the cockpit, the lead hijacker showed no concern for the situation. He sat in the first officer's seat, sipping whiskey and fiddling with the controls. Despite repeated warnings from Abate about the fuel limitations, the hijacker dismissed the pilot's concerns, seemingly oblivious to the danger they were in. As the plane continued to fly over Africa, the hijackers demanded Abate make a call to Australian air traffic control to notify them of their arrival. Instead, Abate used the opportunity to discreetly send a message to his airline, notifying them of the hijacking and their limited fuel supply. But when the hijackers discovered what Abate had done, they grew even more aggressive. With their threats escalating, they ordered him to turn left, toward Australia. Knowing the demands were impossible and the danger was mounting, Captain Abate realized that reasoning with these men was futile. Yet, amidst the chaos, a plan began forming in his mind. A plan that could save lives, but only if he played his cards right. Captain Abate understood the dire reality of the situation. The hijackers' demands to fly to Australia were impossible to fulfill, and their refusal to listen only worsened the danger for everyone on board. With fuel running low and chaos mounting, Abate realized that the only way to save lives was to outthink his captors. Quietly, he devised a plan, one that might just prevent total disaster. Instead of heading directly into the vast, empty expanse of the Indian Ocean, Abate subtly adjusted the plane's course. He aimed toward the Comoros Islands, a small chain of volcanic islands in the Mozambique Channel, far off the coast of Africa. Though unfamiliar with the area, Abate knew it was one of their only chances. If the hijackers eventually realized the plane was running out of fuel, he hoped to convince them to allow a crash landing there. But keeping his plan hidden was no easy task. The hijackers were becoming increasingly erratic. They disabled the plane's radio, ensuring no communication with the outside world, and barked orders to the passengers to stay silent. Meanwhile, the lead hijacker remained in the cockpit, drinking whiskey and recklessly tampering with the controls. He seemed indifferent to the looming fuel crisis, brushing off Abate's repeated warnings as exaggerations. Despite the escalating chaos, Abate stayed focused. He subtly adjusted the plane's trajectory, keeping the islands within reach while giving the appearance of complying with the hijackers' orders. At the same time, he stalled for time by engaging them in conversation, hoping to delay their next move. Every second counted as the plane drew closer to the point of no return. As they approached the edge of the African coast, Abate's fuel gauges confirmed his worst fears. The plane didn't have much longer before running out of fuel entirely. Abate tried once more to plead with the hijackers, urging them to land at a nearby airport in Mombasa for refueling, but his reasoning fell on deaf ears. The hijackers, convinced of their own plans, adamantly refused and ordered him to continue flying out over the open ocean. With time running out, Captain Abate knew he had to take control. He couldn't convince the hijackers to listen, but he could still steer the flight toward the islands. Now, it was a race against the clock to reach the Comoros before the fuel tanks ran dry, a gamble that held the lives of 175 people in the balance. As the plane continued its desperate journey, the situation inside the cockpit spiraled into chaos. The fuel levels were critically low, and Captain Abate knew they couldn't stay in the air much longer. He had managed to guide the plane closer to the Comoros Islands without alerting the hijackers to his true plan. But now, with the fuel nearing exhaustion, the stakes couldn't have been higher. The right engine was the first to fail, leaving the plane operating on just one engine. Abate pleaded with the hijackers, showing them the critical fuel warnings and emphasizing the immediate danger. But the lead hijacker, now intoxicated from whiskey, dismissed the warnings, angrily shouting for Abate to maintain altitude. Moments later, the left engine gave out completely. With both engines down, the Boeing 767 became a massive glider, descending uncontrollably toward the Indian Ocean. Inside the cabin, fear turned to panic. Passengers sat frozen as the crew tried to prepare them for what was to come. The first officer, Giannis, who had been beaten and removed from the cockpit earlier, moved through the cabin, instructing passengers on how to brace for impact. But there was confusion. Some passengers, unfamiliar with the safety instructions due to language barriers, inflated their life vests prematurely, a mistake that could trap them underwater after the crash. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Abate and Giannis fought to stabilize the powerless aircraft. Abate's focus was unwavering as he guided the plane toward the Comoros Islands. He had no choice but to ignore the hijackers' irrational demands and descend toward the water. The hijackers, still in denial about the severity of the situation, began interfering with the controls, worsening the chaos. At one point, they disconnected the autopilot, throwing the plane into a dangerously erratic descent. As the islands came into view, Abate realized they were close but not close enough. With no thrust and limited control, he could only attempt a water landing near the shore. The altitude meter ticked down rapidly, and Abate made one final announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. We have run out of fuel and lost both engines. Prepare for a crash landing." The aircraft descended rapidly, skimming over the water. Abate aimed for the calm surf near the island's coast, but the left wingtip struck the water first, causing the plane to cartwheel violently. The impact tore the fuselage apart, scattering debris across the ocean. Inside, passengers were thrown from their seats, and chaos erupted as water flooded the cabin. For those who had inflated their life vests prematurely, the situation turned even more dire. Trapped beneath the plane's wreckage, many couldn't escape. Others, thrown free during the impact, managed to swim through the debris to safety. Despite the devastation, a miracle unfolded. 50 passengers survived the crash, along with Abate and Giannis, whose heroic actions had saved countless lives. The Comoros Islands' small community, with limited resources, sprang into action. Locals rushed to the scene in small boats, pulling survivors from the wreckage and transporting them to makeshift medical facilities. Though their hospitals were ill-equipped to handle such a disaster, they worked tirelessly to save as many as they could. But the tragedy was profound. Of the 175 people on board, 125 lost their lives. Among the dead were all 3 hijackers, whose irrational demands had led to the disaster. Yet, amidst the sorrow, the courage of Captain Abate and First Officer Giannis stood as a testament to human resilience. Their quick thinking and calm under pressure had turned an impossible situation into a story of survival. The crash of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 was one of the most tragic and extraordinary aviation incidents in history. It claimed the lives of 125 people, including all 3 hijackers, but the survival of 50 passengers was nothing short of a miracle. This was due in no small part to the bravery, professionalism, and quick thinking of Captain Abate and First Officer Giannis. Their actions under extreme pressure turned what could have been total annihilation into a story of resilience. Captain Abate's calm demeanor and ability to adapt to impossible circumstances gave the passengers a fighting chance. His decision to guide the plane toward the Comoros Islands, despite the hijackers' irrational demands, saved dozens of lives. Likewise, First Officer Giannis's tireless efforts to assist the crew and instruct passengers during the crisis proved critical. The disaster highlighted significant flaws in aviation safety at the time, leading to widespread changes in the industry. Airline security protocols were strengthened globally, making it far more difficult for unauthorized individuals to access cockpits. Cockpit doors were reinforced, and new procedures were introduced to ensure that fuel calculations and flight paths were thoroughly vetted, even in emergencies. For passengers, the tragedy underscored the importance of following safety instructions. Many lives were lost because passengers inflated their life vests too early, a mistake that led to entrapment underwater. This incident reinforced the need for clear communication in multiple languages during emergencies, ensuring that all passengers could understand critical safety instructions. But the legacy of Flight 961 goes beyond policy changes. It serves as a reminder of the importance of human resilience in the face of chaos. Captain Abate and First Officer Giannis's ability to stay composed, prioritize safety, and fight against insurmountable odds inspired not only the survivors but also the global aviation community. Their story is taught in pilot training courses as a case study in crisis management and heroism. For those who lost their lives, their memory contributed to a safer future for air travel. The lessons learned from this disaster have helped prevent similar tragedies and improve safety measures worldwide. While the events of that day remain a painful chapter in aviation history, they also stand as a testament to the unbreakable human spirit and the enduring will to survive. May those who perished on Flight 961 rest in peace, and may their legacy continue to safeguard the skies for generations to come. The hijacking of Ethiopian Airlines. Flight 961 is a story that defies simple categorization. It was a tragedy, a tale of heroism, and a moment of reckoning for the aviation industry. But above all, it remains a powerful reminder of the fragility of human life and the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Captain Abate's extraordinary courage and professionalism turned an almost certain disaster into a partial victory for survival. Against irrational hijackers, mechanical failures, and dwindling fuel, he displayed composure and resourcefulness that few could muster. His actions, along with those of First Officer Giannis and the cabin crew, ensured that 50 people survived, a feat that would have been impossible without their efforts. Yet, the scars of this tragedy remain. Families of the 125 lives lost were left to grieve, their pain serving as a solemn reminder of the cost of senseless violence. The passengers who survived were forever changed, carrying with them memories of the terror, the crash, and the aftermath. This incident also forced the aviation industry to confront its vulnerabilities. It prompted lasting changes to cockpit security, emergency protocols, and passenger education. These reforms, born from the tragedy of Flight 961, have undoubtedly saved lives in the years since. For those who hear the story of Flight 961 today, it is a lesson in resilience and humanity. It asks us to reflect on what it means to stand firm in the face of chaos, to prioritize others' safety over our own, and to act with courage even when the odds are against us. This is not just the story of a hijacking, it is a story about the power of calm determination, the importance of learning from our darkest moments, and the enduring will to protect and preserve life. In the skies above the Indian Ocean on that fateful day in 1996, humanity's greatest strengths, courage, hope, and perseverance, shone brightly amidst the darkness.